The Ghost in the Rainy Night. Let me share a story with you about a boy destined to become a shaman. Whether it was natural or the result of hard training due to the family profession, I cannot say. Since childhood, I knew I could communicate with the spirits of the departed. Through that, I also learned many secrets unknown to others. I was the youngest son of my grandfather. He had 3 children. Uncle Andres, 5 years older than my father, followed by Uncle Benito, who was 3 years older than my father. When my grandfather was alive, he was a renowned shaman. He followed the teachings of the Katipunan and often mentioned that Jose Rizal was the patron spirit of our family. Our family consisted of 2 sons and 1 daughter, but Jose, the eldest, didn't inherit the knowledge. My grandfather used to say that my father had always been quiet, calm, and well-behaved as a child, unlike his peers, who were always running and playing. Whenever my father said something, it always came true within a few days. The day my father was passed down the family's shamanic rituals was also the day he officially set foot on the path of mysticism. This had a significant impact on me as well. From the moment I could remember, I had the ability to talk to spirits as if they were living people. I could even distinguish between human spirits, the soldiers of talismans, and demons. I had seen them with my own eyes. I remember when I was 8, a huge storm hit our small, poor village. The adults were busy filling sacks with sand, trying to block the windows. Families with more means stockpiled more, and those with less did what they could. The neighbors helped each other more than ever before. As the sky turned ominous and the winds grew stronger, I still felt calm, not sensing the storm like the adults did. At that moment, I arrogantly thought to myself that the adults were overreacting. How could there be a storm when the sky was so calm? But suddenly I caught the scent of rotting wood carried by the wind. That's when I began to feel uneasy. I saw my parents packing up, preparing to evacuate. My uncle and his wife were doing the same, their son barely over a year old. My uncle asked my father if our family planned to leave, and my father replied that we would head to the local elementary school, a shelter built by the government for such storms. I held my mother's hand as we walked to the school. Inside, the adults arranged chairs in rows, everyone looking worried. I played with kids my age, while my cousin Elise slept in the arms of her mother. As the storm intensified, the winds howled outside, and I clung tightly to my mother in fear. We lay in the school as the storm raged through the night. Children cried, adults comforted them, but I didn't dare open my eyes in fear. By morning, the storm had passed, and I realized I had been lucky to sleep through it all. Many houses in the village had collapsed, though no one had died. My uncle Benito's house was destroyed, and even the portraits of our ancestors were ruined, though my father had managed to save the most important items. After the storm, things slowly returned to normal. But from that moment, a spirit appeared in my uncle Benito's home. Since my family, including my grandfather and father, were shamans capable of seeing and communicating with spirits, I could tell right away that there was a new presence in his home. One day, I encountered a small spirit, the spirit of a child. It told me that it had drowned, its body left by the river, never found. My uncle Benito had helped retrieve its body, and since then, the spirit had followed him home. The child meant no harm. It simply wanted to thank my uncle for his help. From then on, the spirit stayed with my uncle's family, helping them. Each time my uncle set traps for shrimp, the spirit would use its powers to herd the shrimp into the traps, increasing my uncle's harvest. My uncle came to understand the spirit's presence and always set a place for it at the dinner table, treating it as a family member. As time passed, thanks to the invisible assistance of the spirit, my uncle's family became more prosperous. However, they did not set up an altar for the spirit, as my father said it wasn't an ancestor and had no lineage. Establishing an altar would give the spirit free rein to come and goes, which could be dangerous if the spirit turned malicious. The child spirit was deeply grateful for my uncle's kindness, particularly the affection shown by my uncle. It had no evil intentions and only wished to repay my uncle's family. One day, as I was playing with my cousin, the spirit came near me and said, "Kuyahui, I love Uncle Benito very much. He treats me like his own child. I wish I could be his real child." I looked at it, feeling both sympathy and the weight of its loneliness from not having parents. Years passed, and the child spirit became more integrated into my uncle's family. It quietly helped in various ways, from herding shrimp into traps to protecting my uncle from harm. Once in a dream, my uncle saw the spirit warning him about a risky financial deal involving a particular woman. The spirit cautioned my uncle that if he continued, he might lose his money. Following the warning, my uncle declined the deal. A few months later, those who were involved with that woman were swindled, but my uncle's family avoided the loss. Despite this, the spirit could not move on. It stayed with my uncle's family to repay its debt. One day, it said to me, "I know I don't belong here, but I can't leave yet. There are still things I need to finish." I felt sorry for the spirit and came to understand more about the fate of those unable to pass on. It pained me to think that one day the child spirit would have to leave. Life continued peacefully at my uncle's house, but the mysterious presence of the child spirit had become an inseparable part of the family. Then one day, while I was playing with Elise, the spirit suddenly approached and said, "Kuyahui, I have to leave soon. I've repaid my debt to Uncle Benito, and the ancestors have granted me permission to pass on." Surprised, I asked, "When will you go?" It looked at me sadly and replied, "Soon, when the monk comes." A few days later, just as the spirit had said, a monk arrived at my uncle's house. The monk said that it was time for the spirit to leave, to be freed, and no longer bound to the mortal world. My father, a respected shaman, agreed with this decision. He told the spirit, "You've fulfilled your duties in this world. It's time for you to return to where you belong." The child spirit thanked my father, thanked my uncle, and the entire family for treating it so kindly. Before leaving, it came to me and said, "Kuyahui, thank you for playing with me and listening to me. I'll always remember you, no matter where I go." I was overwhelmed with emotion as I embraced the spirit, though it felt like I was hugging something intangible. The spirit faded away, slowly disappearing into nothingness alongside the monk. I stood there in silence, feeling an empty void inside me. After the child spirit left, the atmosphere in my uncle's house felt lighter. My uncle gradually got used to the absence of the little ghost, but there was still a sense of nostalgia. The help the spirit had given, from guiding shrimp into the traps to warning about financial risks, would never be forgotten. Whenever my uncle mentioned the spirit, his eyes would glisten as if recalling a child he had lost, one who could never return. Our family also felt the change. My father sat more quietly in front of the ancestral altar, perhaps reflecting on his responsibilities as a shaman, thinking about how he had helped the spirit move on. Though my father always kept a stern demeanor, I knew he felt the loss when the spirit left. Time passed and the rainy season returned, but it no longer felt as heavy and worrisome as before. One rainy afternoon, I sat on the porch watching the muddy road outside. The rain poured down heavily, blurring the landscape. As I sat there, lost in thought, I heard soft footsteps. Looking up, I saw the slender figure of the monk walking in the rain. Despite the downpour, his robes were untouched, as if protected by an invisible shield. He stopped at the gate of my house, smiled gently, but said nothing. I stood up and greeted him respectfully. The monk simply nodded before continuing his walk, fading into the heavy rain. The sight of him gave me a sense of serenity, as if the child spirit had truly found peace in a better place. That day I returned to the house with a feeling of emptiness yet calm. It felt like all debts had been settled, and life could go on as it was meant to. My father sat by the altar, lighting incense, quietly praying for the spirit, hoping it found peace in the afterlife. I remembered the last time when Tomas, the child spirit, hugged me and said goodbye. He had been a part of my life, even if only for a brief time. From then on, I understood that whether living or dead, every bond we form in life has its purpose and meaning. Those who come into our lives, even briefly, leave a mark in our hearts. A while later, I grew up, no longer playing the hat. A while later, I grew up, no longer playing the childish games of my youth. But the image of Tomas, the child spirit, remained etched in my memory. Whenever I thought of him, I would recall the days we played together, sharing stories that only the two of us could understand. Life went on, but every connection we encounter teaches us valuable lessons. To me, Tomas was not just a spirit, but a friend who taught me about kindness, gratitude, and the peace that comes when everything comes to an end. I always hoped that somewhere far away, Tomas was happy and at peace. And so the story of the ghost in the rainy night ends, not with horror or fear, but with a tale steeped in human compassion and the connection between the living and the dead. Everything begins with fate and concludes when that fate is fulfilled.